All right, going on to Councilor Filipovich, please.
Thank you, President Anderson. Resolution 584, resolution authorizing agreement with Spirit Valley Land Company to construct RiverWest Drive and utilities and provide for assessment of portions of the road cost and the utility cost with attachments. And councilors, I just wanted to, if I may, President Anderson, just talk a little bit about this. This is just to clarify that this is not approving or disapproving or modifying any plan for the Kayak Bay Recreation Area that was mentioned tonight. This is for a road, primarily for the development, $900,000 of which will come from the county, $357,000 of which is for a signal light being paid for by the state, and the developer picking up the remainder of the cost. I did, based on one of the inquiries earlier tonight, there will need to be a mixed-use plan or a regulating plan that will be done before the issuance of any building permits, but that's not for our kind of discussion or approval or vote tonight. And I will just also mention that the EAW, the environmental assessment worksheet, was also reviewed and approved for this project. And so I will just reiterate again that there's no city money. This is to approve that agreement. And so with that, I will yield and recommend approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Cypress, please.
Thank you, President Anderson. I do support this resolution and will be voting for it, but I did want to take the opportunity to say a few words about the relationship between this resolution and the paddle launch issue. A couple years ago, this council made a very controversial decision to approve a kayak launch along the river, along the Western Waterfront Trail, at the end of this road that we're voting on tonight on the opposite side of the railroad tracks. The Parks Commission split on that issue. The City Council was split on that issue. I personally was split on that issue and made a very hard decision, not an easy one, to vote in favor of the paddle launch at that time. Although I could see there were very strong arguments on both sides of that question. It was a tough vote for me. At that time, city staff assured us that there was absolutely no link between the parks project and the private development, and that the only link between the two is that because the paddle launch project was eligible for some state funding, it would reduce the cost of the road that would service both the private development and the paddle launch. So at the time, we were urged by city staff to vote on the merits of the paddle launch in and of itself without any bearing on its impact on the private development. And that's what I did. And I believe that that's what we need to continue to do, to view these as two separate projects. One is a private development, one is a public parks project. The first thing I want to say is that because the city was not able to secure the right-of-way across the railroad tracks, the city is not able to go ahead with the paddle launch at this time, which means we lost that money that we potentially had access to help pay for the road. And I want to thank city staff, because city staff has worked very hard and has figured out other ways to cover that cost without it falling on local taxpayers. So as Councilor Filipovich said, there's no city money going into this road. And that's one of the reasons why I'm voting for this. The fact that we cannot at this time go ahead with the paddle launch has not shifted the cost onto local taxpayers. And I really appreciate the work that city staff, and I appreciate the county stepping up on that as well, to make sure that that doesn't fall on our local taxpayers. But it does leave open the question as to what should happen below the railroad tracks, what should happen with the paddle launch, what should happen along the Western Waterfront Trail right there. And the one thing I do want to say is that while I did vote for the paddle launch originally a year or so ago, I do not want my vote for this project tonight to be taken as a vote in support of necessarily going forward with that project now, because in my mind, things have changed. regardless of the merits of that parks project. I think there's good reason why we want to go slow on all of our river corridor projects right now. When we come out of this pandemic, we're going to have to set some priorities, and we're going to have to strategically invest in those assets and those amenities in the river corridor that we need to bring back. And in the meantime, I think there's good reason to perhaps consider, at least for now, foregoing some of the smaller river corridor projects so we can conserve our funds until we see how those funds might be best used post-pandemic. And with this project in particular, because there may be other lower cost locations for a paddle launch, because there are other lower cost ways to provide access to the Western Waterfront Trail and the river at that location. At this point, for me personally, I think there's good reason to perhaps forego the paddle launch project at that location and look for lower cost alternatives both there and elsewhere. So again, I'm in favor of going ahead with this road, appreciate the work of city staff in covering the cost, and want us to perhaps reconsider whether the paddle launch project makes sense financially given other priorities as we plan for what this post-pandemic world is going to look like in our city.
Thank you. Councilor Kennedy, please.
Thank you, President Anderson. Thank you, Councilor Cypress. You are always able to pinpoint all of the things that we need to consider. So I really love serving with you, and your leadership is teaching me a lot. So my question would be is then, there seems to be a connection in some people's view, whether it's true or not. I think I feel like I need to be a little more clear on that, because in the beginning it was predicated on the paddle launch happening, and I believe Mr. Burns also stated that tonight in some way, that it is a possibility that the expectation from the developer is that the paddle launch is happening. I know it's not happening now. I know we've lost the ability of some to be able to use some funding, but I don't want to be caught then down the road. Like if we voted on this, that was sort of a yes to the paddle launch. And I believe Councilor Cypress, you were stating that as well. I'm not sure if Mr. Schuckman is available or Mr. Philby Williams to ensure that by voting yes on this, that we're not inadvertently setting something in motion, and I will yield.
Thank you. Mr. Schuckman, if you would, please.
President Anderson, Councilor Kennedy, if you wouldn't mind just restating the question, I want to make sure that I understood it correctly.
I feel like if we vote on this, we're going to be setting things in motion to where the paddle center would happen. I believe Mr. Burns stated something even tonight that the project was predicated on that, and that the developer is hoping that it will still happen. And since it was so closely connected in the past, where are we now, and how will we ensure that we're not setting something in motion to where it could happen, and that we're not able to really fully reassess the paddle center?
President Anderson, Councilor Kennedy, there is no next step coming on this project where, you know, at your next meeting there will be a resolution for the kayak entry point. That's not to say that it is something that we wouldn't work on at some point, but it is that's also something that I believe would need to come back through the council at that point, and we are some ways away from that. And so I can't speak for Mr. Burns or for the developer and what their expectations and needs are in terms of the success or failure of that development. That's something that is a question for them, but the city is not, this is not a, this action tonight is not an automatic, you know, ball rolling down a hill that we can't stop in terms of additional discussions moving forward on the possibility of that kayak entry point.
Thank you, Mr. Schuckman. Councilor Filipovich, please.
Thank you, President Anderson. I just wanted to just again restate, it's been stated a couple different times, that this is not a vote on in favor of or not in favor of the planned or proposed park area, recreation area below the track site. This is purely for the road for the development. I stated that, Councilor Cypress stated that, and Mr. Schuckman stated that earlier tonight. And I think if I can pontificate on the item that we're not voting on tonight, the recreation area below the tracks, that is something that we have an approved plan for. I think it is obvious that with the pandemic, with the city not being able to acquire the access over the railroad and some of the land there, that plan might be changing. And after the discussion, both on Thursday and tonight, I would expect that plan perhaps to be changed or at least looked at. And Mr. Schuckman is correct, at least from my memory, that we will be reviewing that as council, and that would need to come through us for final kind of approval before any changes are made down there. But again, on Resolution 584, the item that we are talking about tonight and voting on in a short while here, this is authorizing that agreement with the developer who will be covering a lot of the costs. So again, thank you to city staff, but also thank you to the developer for providing or kind of making up that difference of the cost. And so this is an opportunity, councilors, for us to add some housing of some different variety in our city, and also some retail space as well. So with that, I will urge or recommend approval on this agreement for the road for this potential development. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other councilors in the queue, Clerk Peterson, if you would please call the roll on Resolution 584.
Councillor Filipovich,
Yes.
Councillor Forsman,
Yes.
Councillor Kennedy,
Yes.
Councillor Medved,
Yes.
Councillor Randorf,
Yes.
Councillor Cypress,
Yes.
Councillor Tomanik,
Yes.
Vice President Van Nett,
Yes.
Vice President Van Nett,
Yes.
President Anderson.
Yes, Resolution 584 passes unanimously.